all of those peer mentoring, those late night conversations, those aha moments, that building of community. I feel a part of this because I am in this group. And the little things, the little traditions that build that connection are so important. How do we start building this at a younger age?
That was Lisa Leander, founder of the WIBE Network, which stands for Where Imagination Builds Excellence and was formerly Women in Business Education. Lisa is a master builder when it comes to community, and we had a fantastic conversation about the ingredients in her secret sauce, things like values, norms, rituals, followership, and ownership, and what this all means for folks that are focused on community and belonging to enable student success. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Connected College podcast. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've helped more than 100 colleges and universities change what they offer, how they operate, and how they're organized to enable student success. And if you're a leader in higher ed and you think that the silos and separations get in the way of student success, then this podcast and the Connected College are for you. We're here to learn and work together to bust silos, question tradition, and forge partnerships so that students feel connected to their college, their community, their coursework, and their careers.
Welcome, Lisa. I'm so excited to talk about how community is the real curriculum. And a great way to get started, I think, is to hear a little bit about yourself and how you got started in higher ed.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Elliot. It's great to be here. I started in higher ed way back in 2008. I developed partnerships between universities. And that early, almost 2 decades ago experience definitely has stuck with me, that this idea of connections and partnership and community is where I would land up and continue to stay in higher ed. I am the CEO of Where Imagination Builds Excellence, which started formally known as Women in Business Education. And essentially, after working in several different fields, all in higher ed universities, I landed up specifically in business education and built a massive network of contacts working at many different business schools, doing different consulting and projects, and realized how disconnected individuals were, especially women, who in many cases is not quite as visible in the senior roles. So I started out with WIBE as Women in Business Education, connecting senior women business leaders in business education. And now we've expanded this year to be a leadership organization for men and women looking to lead with imagination and curiosity, but also community.
That's really exciting that you're like building these connections across institutions, because with so much going on, it just makes no sense to go it alone. I'd love to hear, as we dive into this topic of community is the real curriculum, I would love to hear your definition of student success.
For me, student success is not the spreadsheet matrix. It is not the GPA or the retention report, or for many of the senior leaders, it's a line item in this accreditation binder. I think of it holistically and from this idea of when imagination meets opportunity. When I see a student that is supported, that is seen and surrounded by community, I see success really community over competition, this confidence to experiment, this idea when students are encouraged to think sideways and break patterns, bringing imagination into these spaces. I want to see bravery, some psychological safety, and I want to see agency. Agency is a huge core value to me, agency and independence. And certainly as both a mother thinking about raising teenagers and someone also working in higher ed, all of those themes are so much more than inside a classroom.
Yeah, the idea that bold decisions, bravery, agency, making an impact, they all come from having the support, the inspiration from a community, building that confidence, being creative. I like that holistic approach and getting beyond the numbers. Are any of those things measurable? Can you measure community or creativity or confidence?
Really hard question. It goes to the inputs versus the outcomes or the outputs. I would say a GPA measures memory, a community measures momentum. And sometimes we see that in applications, right? We want to see skills of leadership. We want to see a passion project. You measure it so little.
I love the idea that you're looking at momentum. It parallels a soapbox issue for me, doing a lot of library transformation work. Libraries for the last 20 years have been stuck on this word commons. First, there was a information commons when they invited IT into the library. And then there was the learning commons that was bringing in tutoring and writing and other advising other services to support learning, all of which are great. And then the research commons to support research, working with data, presentations, podcasts, all these things. But to me, it's like you flipped the ends and the means, because just bringing people together isn't the goal in and of itself. It's so that those people can do something together, right? It's so that they can have the impact, have the agency, generate momentum, make a dent in the universe, that's community in service of something.
When I think about it, and it's coming up a lot more, there's a term for it, soft skills, soft skills. What does that mean? What does that look like? And how do we teach that? And for me, it's the students that know how to collaborate, how to navigate conflict, and how to ask for help, especially as we see AI move more and more into taking away the memorization piece. That is going to fill in the gaps for many students. But the piece that it can never replace is this idea of connectivity. This week, I felt this example of how do you measure this. We ran at WIBE. We do professional development for senior leaders. And this week, we were very focused on fundraising, developing international advisory boards, developing new revenue streamlines for your institutions, and moving into higher ed, even within the student success and the investment and budget that we're going to make into that is going to require more avenues than we've seen before. And as we discussed this, we talked about the individuals that we like on these international advisory boards, the people that we need to be successful. And an overwhelming theme, more so than even finding donors or alumni, was this idea of connectivity. That we need to surround ourselves with people who are well networked and well connected, and the power of what they bring to this institution. How do we start building this at a younger age? And I will say, as a master community builder, this idea of networking is ick. I do feel the ick around that. I think thinking as we build those connections, because AI will never replace the power of asking for help, the power of collaboration and coming up with new ideas. And starting that at a younger age and recognizing all of those peer mentoring, those late night conversations, those aha moments, that building of community. And they give very specific, small examples of what it means to be in a community at a school. One thing is having a nickname. The power of going by your nickname and or the power of going to your tagline, it brings up a biological brain connection, but it builds on the heart. I feel a part of this because I am in this group. And the little things, the little traditions that build that connection are so important.
You're already answering where I was going to go next, because as a master community builder, what's your secret sauce? I feel like we just heard two ingredients, which is a name, which I totally agree with. One of the reasons my former company was called Bright Spot, it was acquired by Bureau Happold. And one of the ideas was be very intentional about we're bright spotters. Having a name that you can add ERS to, I think, or naming the project you're on or the project team you're on, I think is such a great way to bring people together. And then thinking about the rituals, the routines, the things that make the traditions is such a great point. What are the other ingredients to building community once you've created a name and started some traditions?
When we're thinking about student success and also joining any group, the first step is it's really important to distinguish between community and cliques. And I want to highlight that before I jump into how to make it effective. There are lots of ways to find community, whether it's locally in your neighborhood, and there's many opportunities on campus as well. But first is to define when is it a positive experience and when is it a negative. And the first thing is community generally is on these shared values that are defined. And this idea that more is better. Come sit with us, you belong here. And that is a tagline that I use in WIBE so much. You belong here. For those of you, I want to shout out for you that is facing that. I see you. I feel you. I continue to feel you. I continue to be an outsider, bringing in disruption and change. As you think about student success, are you building a community or have you built a clique? A clique is you have to earn your way in, and the rules aren't written down. Communities widen the circle, cliques close the door. And communities, you grow because everyone wants everyone to succeed. And in cliques, you advance only if you protect the hierarchy.
Yeah, it's like defining yourself by who you keep out rather than who you invite in.
I think it's careful not to get into that and to recognize sometimes when you've become that.
Yeah.
It's easy to do. You want to hang out with the people you already know. It is challenging to bring in sometimes really different voices that sometimes you don't always agree with.
So we've got the name, the tradition, the shared values, the belonging. I also heard like things aren't written down, so making the norms and the culture explicit seems like another key thing. And you're building up this toolkit for communities, but those communities are also changing. It sounds like you started during COVID, you started focusing on women in business education, and now you're much more broad. How is building community changing?
I think what is most important right now in higher ed is that community evolves. We're constantly adapting, we're resilient, and we're future focused. And it wasn't an easy shift to go from a mission oriented towards women's leadership to a mission oriented towards the future of all leadership in business education, and to become more inclusive and have more voices. We have always welcomed men and women, but the mission certainly was focused on the unique aspect of women's leadership. For some people, that community is no longer what they need. And hopefully you have enough that they have other places to go to. Or in my role, sometimes you've graduated. Sometimes you have found your ecosystem of support, of your masterminders, of your individuals, that you are well connected. But that's what we want to see. We want to see people graduating and to getting what they need out of the community and are continuing to build it as well. What you don't want to get is this idea of being fragile or defensive and threatened by change and by others. We're adapting to what we're seeing and what we're needing. We're being resilient. It's opened a lot of doors. Our future deans that we ran a couple weeks ago had over 75 men and women, 50% attend. And that impact is even greater on what we're going to do on the future of leadership. I do believe that there are still necessary spaces for these smaller niches, whether it's in the dean's role, whether it's being a woman, whether it's being industry turned to academic. I think we all need to find this space where we feel comfortable without it turning negative or cliquey.
You've really hit on imagination as the key ingredient. Connect the dots for me between community and imagination. How does one enable another? leaders are overwhelmed today with all the things they're trying to do and trying to learn to be an even better person, professional. What role does imagination play in that, and how does community relate to that? I guess a two-parter.
And I challenge you as well, for those at universities and thinking about your students, to creating these joyful, playful experiences that allow you the opportunity to solve serious problems. And that's where I see the imagination part. Academia is so serious. We embrace critical analysis. We embrace the red pen, and we are, through journals, through review committees, through accreditation, uplifted by finding out what's wrong versus lifting up what could be. And in our community, bringing in lots of different voices from outside of academia. You attend so many conferences where we hear individuals in our same roles talking about our same problems. But what we need to see right now is others. So one is bringing in extraordinarily different voices where you don't even see the match. At an early conference years ago, before the big AI boom, before ChatGPT, I brought in an AI expert in pharmaceuticals. And people were asking me, why is our keynote someone from industry who specializes in pharmaceuticals? What does that have anything to do with business education? And even the keynote speakers thought, are you sure I'm the right voice for this? And I said, we need to know what's happening, where there is incredible investment. And during the speech, he goes, oh my gosh, there's so many similarities of what is happening in higher ed. And she even realized how many similarities there were. And not going to lie, a lot of our participants left a little terrified of what they saw, where huge investment and the potential of what is going to happen, but also inspired by it. We need to be in places where we do not see the match to be able to learn from that. That is creativity, is taking two disparately different things and bringing them together. So one, bringing in totally different voices. Two, especially right now, being playful again, being joyful, and being in a safe space to try things out. And that's what we try to do through our workshops. Our entire fundraising was called Fundraising Fundapalooza. It was all circus related. What does the circus have to do with higher ed funding? And that was the challenge, because fundraising sometimes is not so fun. So what if it was? And that's challenging our leadership and challenging those working with students. What if? Sometimes we lose that and lose that ability, and it's very much negative poverty mindset. Can't do that. We've already done that before. It didn't work. And we have to break ourselves out of that.
So leaders in higher ed who are trying to enable student success, the scarcity mindset and the seriousness and the constraints and all these kinds of things, and what they actually need is to dial up the imagination, which sounds like innovation's more playful, creative cousin or something, where you have more diversity of perspectives and voices and people from other sectors and playing other roles, and maybe a little less serious, a little more playful to find new ways of thinking about things, and maybe community that brings some psychological safety to take some risks and experiment with new ways of doing things and get inspired by what other people are doing.
When I think about translating this to student success, success doesn't come from playing by the rules. Find the people who help you rewrite them. And one, you have those student leaders. They have a lot of the solutions themselves. A lot of the innovation and the need for community, they are building themselves. And I would pull from those individual leaders. But the impact and success of community building and connection is very rarely those leaders. I want to talk about the power of the first followers. and why you're probably not investing enough in the first followers. In order to create these traditions, to create the followers, and at WIBE, certainly I am the leader, and I probably lean into that more so. I do think of myself as creative. I do some crazy things, knowing that there will be those first group of followers who say, this is cool, and I'm going to start mimicking what the leader does. Most of the individuals then that come together through that group, you can call it a sorority or a club or a student group as part of a class, or even within a class, the first group that presents. The first group that presents, or even if you're thinking about making an investment in that leader, I want you to take a step back and look at the first followers. Most of the individuals that join that group don't mimic the leader. They mimic those first individuals, those 5 to 10 followers. Most of the investment or most of the meetings go into that individual leader, but your power is in those first followers. And I want to talk about how I did this at my most recent conference. At my most recent Bold You conference this summer, I knew that everyone knew who I was because I am the leader, but I would, like a wedding, not have time to spend with 100 conference fellows. I wouldn't be able to network with them or make them feel welcome. In fact, I wasn't sure I'd have any time. I was going to be behind the scenes running the event. And most leaders are busy. They're busy running the show. They don't have as much time to build the community, but your first followers do. So what I did is I looked around for my most extroverted individuals who I felt could carry the values. And I asked them if they would help me be team leaders of this conference. Okay. And I said, could you help be me in making sure that your group felt welcome, felt like they had support in you, felt like they could come to you? And they were honored for that volunteer privilege. And then I gave it that team, like you're part of something. Each of them were a team color. And they all got to dress in that color so they could find each other and immediately feel a community within their community. And I picked the right first followers because each of them owned it. They went over and above and thinking of these creative community that I couldn't even think of. They had branded nails and branded outfits. They bought little gifts for each of the communities. They had their own WhatsApp groups. They went to dinner together. And it was them following each other and the community following them that brought about more connections, and I feel a part of something bigger than myself. It wasn't me being the leader. It was investing in those individuals, and then everyone followed their lead. And what color did I wear? I had to wear all 10 colors. So I had a very vibrant outfit, and I had all 10 nail colors on my nails, and I represented all of them. But that is such a small way. It was free. It was volunteer. That core group was my team and inspiring them. And then I was blown away. And here I thought I was created. They brought it up to the next level. As you're thinking about your students, as you're thinking about your student leadership, as you're thinking about success, it's not the student getting the A. It's that group of 5 first initial individuals at that club meeting. And think about how you're inspiring, investing in them. That's who will be followed.
That's great advice. And that feels like another key ingredient in community building is finding those first followers. And that just a great lesson for leaders is you can't do it all. You have to delegate and empower people. And I just hear so many themes in what you're saying resonate with what I wrote in the book and what I've heard from so many other people. There's no shortage of good ideas, right? What we're missing is the good implementation. Everybody's got some awesome pilot that's run on their campus, right? But they can't get anybody else to buy into it because they didn't have the scaling strategy. They didn't find the followers. They didn't invest in them. The other thing I'm hearing is just that student success is dependent on leadership success, right? You can't have one without the other, whether it's presidents and provosts and deans and department heads, or whether it's the leaders of student organizations or the broader student body. I think this is really great. I'm loving the ingredients in your secret sauce to community and imagination.
I would say that creativity, innovation, and imagination can almost be interchangeable. It's how to stop talking about it and how to actualize it.
Yeah, back to the momentum, right? The like bringing people together in a community is how you then accomplish something. So Lisa, we've been talking about this secret sauce for building community and enabling imagination to solve problems and create momentum and impact. I feel like one of the big things that gets in the way are siloed structures and distributed, decentralized institutions and RCM budget models and separate systems. It just seems like there's so many things that separate us at a time when community is the real curriculum and this is how you actually make an impact. What are your top tips for breaking down those silos and getting people to connect as a community across disciplines or departments or even across institutions or with industry?
And I appreciated this so much in your book, and I know that you do so much work around this as well. And as you were saying it, I thought, oh, bureaucracy is the boogeyman. Bureaucracy is the boogeyman of higher education. It is the scary monster that haunts us. And there is no way in even an hour we could continue, we could even chip away a little bit at this. So this is my top tips, and also working in higher ed for 20 years and experiencing this externally from hosting events, from doing work on campus, and how it feels in the moment, and also how deflating that is as an individual. And it all comes down to this idea of ownership. And when we walk into these situations and not knowing who feels incredibly almost to the point of toxic ownership of something, and or the opposite extreme, which is disengaged, no one will touch it, that's not my job, that's not my responsibility. So as we're thinking about silos, usually the problem is around ownership. Either you feel too much ownership, you can't lose control, you can't delegate, you can't share. Power is information. And then that extreme opposite, which is no one will touch it, no one takes responsibility, and they're disengaged. In fundraising, we talk about this a lot, the silos and ownership, because when you add money is power, money is control, usually you see this to an extreme, whether it's who owns the relationship, who owns the decision-making, who even has the ability to make the meeting. You see this, and it's across disciplinaries too, right? I call it the Goldilocks of ownership. You want enough that it is done and done well, but not too much where they don't share it. And that comes down to people. And so much, again, it's this community, it's this connection, it's the people. You can talk about that department, but that's people. And you can talk about higher ed leadership, and that's people. And we're not perfect, and we've got insecurities. And for those of you out there, I'm going to say that serenity prayer for you, what you can do and solve what's within your expertise to solve, but also the courage to say, we're not going to fix everything, and you're not going to fix everything. And you might get a lot of bruises trying to fix everything. My thought around this is to remember it's people and to remember it's insecurities. Remember that you're not going to solve every problem. But for any one way, working in many things and thinking about how I use my network, how I use my community, is you can, on an individual human level, cross many barriers. Usually, if you can get just two people to connect, usually on a personal level, I cannot discount the value of connection over parenting problems, sports teams, similar hobbies, that if you can connect at a personal level, you can get anything done at a professional level. I'm going to repeat that because this is why community and networking and those evening events and those mentors, that if you can connect on a personal level, you can get anything done on a professional level. That's why we get a little joyful and a little playful and a little silly. Sometimes we'll bring out the Legos and we'll bring out the Play-Doh, and then we'll talk about how we have to cut the budget in half and how we're going to do that, or walking into a performance evaluation. Remember to trigger that point in your head that we are still all people trying to do the jobs that we best that we can.
I think it's great advice because it is about that Goldilocks level of ownership and recognizing that it comes down to people and making the personal connection. And it also makes me think just about kind of team design too, because like when you were talking about the right level of ownership, one model I've always been fond of, the Cantor-Isaacs model for group participation, says every effective team needs 4 perspectives, right? You have to have a proposer, an opposer, an advancer, and an advisor, basically. So you have to have someone who provides a direction, then you have to have someone who actually opposes that direction, not in an unhealthy or egotistical or whatever way, but a way that challenges it to make it better. And then to your point earlier, you have to have a follower, right? You have someone who wants to run with the ball. But then you also have to have someone who isn't so invested in the outcome, right? Who doesn't have that too much ownership so that they can give you unbiased advice. This is a great formula. Names, traditions, shared values, belonging, norms, followers, and Goldilocks ownership equals a community where people can unleash their imagination and solve serious problems more joyfully and playfully. So thank you.
If there's one thing that I want people to walk away with today from this conversation is that success is not a solo act. And my challenge to you then is, how do you help students find their circle and build something bigger together?
Great advice. Thank you so much for all the insights you shared and all the great work you're doing at WIBE. And people find that at WIBEnetwork.com.
That's right. WIBE you can find at WIBEnetwork.com, WIBEnetwork.com. And you're welcome to also find me on LinkedIn. And I hope that you will connect with me. I'm always looking to build my network, especially with interesting people.
Thanks, Lisa.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Elliot. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Connected College podcast. Subscribe to my Connected College newsletter at elliottfelix.com for insights and excerpts from my upcoming book, tools you can download, and special offers. You can also find more information about talks I've given, articles I've written, and upcoming events there. And please support the podcast by rating and reviewing it wherever you're listening. Let's create connected colleges where students will succeed.